We just were hearing some good news from Annie Reddick about how an organization is going to have her in for a book reading to read some of her book. Annie, what's the title of your book?
Gratitude, a Path to Grace.
And this just was kind of like immediately prompted in my head that we think about book signings after we write and publish a book, but actually just offering to have almost a type of speaking event, but one that, like, if you're not really ready to take to the stage and
Yeah.
be have a presentation, you could offer to do a reading from your book, a little Q&A or a workshop or something around that. So it can be an easy way to get into speaking. And when you have a book, you can have that as a type of, first of all, a springboard for some content, but also a little bit of a introduction and a little something to almost have as a shield for when you're doing some speaking. So good for you, Annie. Congratulations on that. All right, we're going to get started here with my What Makes It Good. And again, welcome. Thank you for joining the Publishing and Promotion Mastermind today. This is what I call my every once in a while series that I do when I find a really good piece of writing and I want to share it with you and highlight and underline what makes it good. So this is from a book called Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghosts. It's by Crystal Wilkinson. And this little part of it's called Tasting Indian Creek. And it was published here on Oxford American. And this is I'll put a link in the chat when we return for questions and comments and things like that. And this is free. You don't have to subscribe or pay to read this online for yourself. So you can go back and read it a little bit more for yourself. So let me just read the first couple paragraphs and I'll talk about what makes it good. I lived on Indian Creek with my grandparents after my mother suffered a nervous breakdown. Within my family unit, wedged between my grandparents, long after my aunts and uncles had left home, long after my mother had recovered from her second nervous breakdown and moved to Lexington to live permanently, I felt like I belonged to no other place and to no other people. This was, of course, due to the stories my grandparents told and a deep generational sense of belonging to the land. Passed down family story says that when my enslaved ancestors were freed, one of our enslavers deeded to his laborers, many of whom were his offspring, land along what is known now as Indian Creek Road. That raised the ire of local white folks. I don't know this to be true. I can't find any proof of it, but I'm a storyteller, not a historian, and this notion has always intrigued me. What I do know is that my grandfather's father, Daddy Joe, deeded my grandfather land shortly after my grandparents married in 1929 and started a family. My grandfather often boasted that he could take me to the place he'd been born, and I held his hand many times when I was a girl as he walked me across the plank on the shallow end of the creek into a field and showed me the place where his mother had given birth to him, where a house once stood. He pointed to the spot that looked just like part of the field to me. He looked down at me with pride and then stared at his birthplace with a wistfulness that I've never forgotten. Before we continued to the barn to check on the horses and the cows, I too still hold a longing for that land in my blood. My grandmother had been born nearby too, but she never pointed out the place to me. She spoke lovingly of advice from her mother. Occasionally she'd point to a tumble of wood and weeds and say, "That's Aunt Frances's old place," or "I believe the old barn was over there," or "When I was little, we used to swim right up there," or "That's where the house was before we lost it to the fire." But most of my memories of her are nestled in the growing, the cooking, the preservation of food. Hoeing the garden, stroking the long necks of the yellow squash, stirring butter beans in a pot, pouring hot bacon grease over new lettuce, onions, and cucumber, canning runner beans. Every morning of my childhood, my grandmother donned an apron and cooked breakfast. Slow, precise, deliberate. She equated food with love, and she cooked with both a fury and a quiet joy. She fried bacon, sausage, or country ham. She scrambled eggs. The eggs came from our chickens. She made biscuits from scratch. The lard was rendered from our pigs, the milk from our cows. She rolled out the dough and threw flour into the air like magic dust. She churned butter, made the preserves from pears, peaches, or blackberries that she had harvested herself. Not long after I entered school, Indian Creek's Black population was waning. Me and my two cousins were the only Black children in the school and sometimes bore the brunt of racist encounters. But at home, it was affirmed that we'd been in this community since the beginning, and I felt as if the old-time people were alive and amongst us every time my grandparents said their names: the Pattons, the Willites, the Wilkinsons, the Napiers. They worked and loved and cherished this little piece of God's earth in Casey County. Poor whites and Blacks mingled some. They helped each other out when it was necessary, and often it was necessary due to harsh weather and rough terrain. But mostly there was a dignity and a sense of cooperative Black community that was a solid part of my upbringing in this Black enclave, as it had been for my mother and her siblings and those who'd come before. My line extends from Aggie, my fourth great grandmother, to Lizzie, second great grandmother, to Lily, great grandmother, to Christine, grandmother, to Dorsey, mother, and Lovester, my aunt, to me and our children. What I know of my foremothers and forefathers from sparse documentation has been augmented by passed down story and my own communion with the ancestors. All right, let me see here. And then I'm just going to skip that next paragraph. And then Lily Patton Wilkinson, my grandmother's mother, was born in 1889 and died of heart disease in 1939, just a month after my mother was born. She was an emblem of hard work, gathering water from the creek daily. She taught my grandmother the value of a soft tongue and well-cooked food. My grandfather was a tobacco farmer and also raised corn, pigs, and cattle. He farmed the old way with horse-drawn equipment well into the 1980s and early 1990s. He made sorghum, molasses, witched wells, and was a devout member of his church. All right, then there's a picture of the author, Crystal, I'm sorry. And then I'm going to go and talk a little bit about what makes it good in these first paragraphs. And then we're going to talk about the food a little bit more here in this next paragraph, this long one there. All right, so what makes it good here? First of all, you can tell that this author has a voice. And this is her voice, and it's a little bit, I will just say, a little bit unpolished, but obviously it works for her, and she's publishing this book, and it's just amazing, some of the writing. But I'm just kind of thinking, if I was doing a manuscript review of this, I would say, well, the sentence is really long, or this sounds a little awkward, or something like that. But now I can see, and of course, this is part of a bigger book, and it has been polished, but it still has a couple of rough edges, but that's what makes it her voice. Some really long sentences here going on, and a little bit like just a touch or two where it goes off into a tangent, so it's not really on point the entire way, but that's okay. And so just a reminder to me and to you that writing doesn't have to be exactly 100% pristine and polished. And sometimes leaving in longer sentences, or what I believe Jelena calls, echo words and stuff, is okay. And that can be part of the author's voice. Now, a couple of things here I want to say. I always like to focus on opening paragraphs. So I lived on Indian Creek with my grandparents after my mother suffered a nervous breakdown. All right, so that's an opening sentence, and it's just kind of like information, and then we get this, extra special piece of information: suffered a nervous breakdown. So that is telling us something about the author by this is something she reveals in the first sentence. And then in this next sentence, within my family unit, wedged between my grandparents, long after my aunts and uncles had left home, long after my mother had recovered from her second nervous breakdown and moved to Lexington to live permanently. So this is, we're hearing, okay, mother had second nervous breakdown and moved to Lexington to live permanently. So she was away from Crystal, the author, her daughter. And sometimes when we're telling stories, this is a type of personal memoir, we can just say like, oh, my mother had a first nervous breakdown, and this is what it led to, and this is how I felt, and this is what we did, and da 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 da. And then she had a second one, and then this is what happened there, and then this is how I felt, and this is what we did, and that ended up with her moving to Lexington, where she stayed, and she moved permanently. But the author doesn't take the time or frankly waste the words to explain that. Instead, she just gets that across with these two opening sentences, because she wants to move on what she sees as important in this, and that is how she was raised. There's two themes here to this book and this passage I'm sharing. Of course, is the ancestry, and then also what we're coming up is going to be the food. And again, the title is Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghosts. So that is about, again, the theme is right there in the title, and she's going to stick to that theme. She's not going to go on some tangents about her mother and this nervous breakdown, but yet she sets the tone like we know something just by mentioning this right here in the opening paragraph. Some other things that make it good here in the beginning, talking about the where her ancestry, that she's Black, and then the ire of local white folks. So she has this type of almost, it's not slang. It's a type of voice that's a little bit old-fashioned, we'll say. This isn't modern speak here. So, and you can tell that this voice was developed from her family members that she lists here and that she talks about in this book. My favorite part in this paragraph, where her grandfather shows where he was born, is crossing a plank on the shallow end of the creek. If any of you are like me, if I was raised on a farm in northwestern Pennsylvania, I know exactly what she's talking about with those planks that are just kind of thrown almost seemingly randomly, but they're thrown in places where it's like, oh, we need a little help in crossing this muddy part of a creek or a swamp or something like that. And so I love that detail she points out in there. And then making that connection, I too still hold a longing for that land in my blood. So she's really tying herself and making the connection between her ancestry and herself in this writing. I like this use of little pieces of dialogue that she almost has like a list here in this paragraph. Occasionally she'd point to a tumble of wood and weeds, nice little alliteration there, short words, and say, that's Aunt Frances's old place, or I believe the old barn was over there, or when I was little, we used to swim right up there, or that's where the house was before we lost it in the fire. Yet it's showing the history, and I just love this string of phrases. They're actually, they're sentences, but she doesn't make each one, a period after each one. She strings them together with this or, and just has a beautiful rhythm to that writing, and that liveliness, bringing in those little pieces of dialogue there. And then, of course, the lists here, and the action verbs: hoeing the garden, stroking the long necks of the yellow squash, stirring butter beans in a pot, pouring hot bacon grease over new lettuce, onions, and cucumber, canning runner beans. So here we're getting not only into the garden and the land, but here the preservation of food, or the preparation of food. And we're starting, just such vivid writing. And that's the nice thing, that food really lends itself to some vivid writing, where we can bring, sense and touch and taste and all of that into it. She starts that here by having this run of description of these vegetables and things. And again, here's another one. I know my grandmother used to make that hot bacon grease over new lettuce, and there's this distinct taste to it. I think my grandmother put some vinegar in there too, onions and cucumber, and my mouth is starting to water. Like that is like, again, that is like just such good writing, in that it's bringing this not only emotion or memories or descriptions, but even just this type of reaction from the reader. More food here. She fried bacon, sausage, or country ham. She scrambled eggs. Of course, this is a great sentence. She equated food with love, and she cooked with both a fury and a quiet joy. Just that energy, right? That fury, but yet it's tempered with that quiet joy. What a beautiful sentence there. And then again, more food descriptions here. All right, let's see here. And then finally, before I move on a little bit here, I love the way she just so simply and elegantly describes the names and the relationships. My line extends from Aggie, my fourth great grandmother, to Lizzie, second great grandmother, to Lily, great grandmother, to Christine, grandmother, to Dorsey, mother, and Lobster, my aunt, to me and our children. Just so elegantly done. We're getting the names in there and the relationships, and the the use of the parentheticals here is just really quite brilliant. Here's another great sentence. She taught my grandmother the value of a soft tongue and well-cooked food. Excellent, again, description there about the personality, and of course, getting back into the kitchen. You can tell that the females are going to be the stars of this, but yet she's giving nods to her grandfather and things as well, but you can kind of tell it's going to be the females. Okay, I want to read this next paragraph and then finish up with what makes it good. All right, born in 1915, my grandmother Christine married my grandfather in her early teens. She tended the farm, 2 gardens, and livestock while also raising 2 sons and 5 daughters. When she wasn't toiling her piece of land, she labored as a domestic, cooking for both her own large family and the families of her employers. She worked almost until the day she died in 1994, and I still conjure her wielding a stirring spoon and butcher knife, not just simply providing sustenance, but something more. In the corner of my grandmother's kitchen, spirits shimmered near the bucket of well water, hovered over the olive refrigerator, floated above the flour sifter, and glided around the coal-burning stove. The dead danced, both protecting and cajoling. My grandmother told me of the haints she'd seen and the ones she remembered. She told these stories at supper time while we were cooking. She lofted her mother's apple cakes to myth. I imagined food that tasted so good that it was like nothing I'd ever experienced. My grandmother told me that women were expected to maintain the lineage, to strive to make dishes that rivaled their mothers. She held long-necked yellow squash as gently as babies. Her own desires to be a school teacher, to travel the states, were doused in favor of making her parents happy and marrying young. When she walked gingerly carrying a large pot, when she hefted a ham during hog killing time, when she placed her hand over her mouth and laughed, she looked like a child in a grown woman's body, even when she was old. Sometimes my grandmother grew sullen and a scowl came over her face while we cooked. But when she looked into the corners of the kitchen, up towards the ceiling, her face fell into soft satisfaction before she took up the knife to scrape a corn cob clean or to grind cabbage for slaw. What a great paragraph here, describing her grandmother Christine in the kitchen, her demeanor, some of her personality, her physical attributes. I mean, it is all in here. The connection that she had and the lessons that she taught Christine, or I'm sorry, Crystal, the person too, who is describing this. So just underlining a couple points about what makes it good. In the corner of my grandmother's kitchen, spirits shimmered near the bucket of well water, hovered over the olive refrigerator, floated above the flour sifter, and glided around the coal-burning stove. This again is a nod to the title of this. This author knows her theme and she is embracing it, and she is laser focused on it throughout this piece, and I imagine throughout the book. And just the descriptions here are so great. spirit shimmered near the bucket of well water. The third time I'm saying that, and I still stuttered on it and stumbled on it. But when you're reading it and say in your mind's voice, you won't stumble on it. The reader doesn't, and just can admire without even realizing that's what they're admiring, is the spirit shimmered well water. Like the use of those words and the sounds of those words, and even the way they look on the page is just beautiful. And of course, the dead dance, both protecting and cajoling. This author knows how to write a long sentence, but she also has these shorter and medium sentences throughout to keep that writing rhythm going. Another, okay, so these two sentences right in a row are so good. She lofted her mother's apple cakes to myth. All right, so just even describing this food and where it just becomes something larger than itself with these apple cakes. And then this sentence is so brilliant. I imagined food that tasted so good that it was like nothing I'd ever experienced. That's how good this food was. It was like you can't even like kind of imagine for yourself, because you've never experienced food this good. And it says so much about the descriptions and the way it's described, and now the author's take on this too, about this food. And then I'll end with this. There's so much good stuff in here, but she held long-necked yellow squash as gently as babies. Evidently, yellow squash played a big role, because it's like in this, even in this one passage, like 3 or 4 times. But what a beautiful personification. And, you can just kind of see it. And a long-necked yellow squash can almost look like, if you use your imagination, like a little doll or like a little baby. And so like holding this as gently as babies is just, shows her gentleness. But that is juxtaposed with she hefted a ham during hog killing time. So this is not that we'd have any indication up until this point, but this is not a weak woman. She's not like, playing like everything is, the squash are babies, but she also hefted a ham during hog killing time. So she is a worker, she's strong, and then she's right in there doing these things that aren't so pleasant to do, like hog killing time. Oh, and then there's one other thing, what comes right after. When she placed her hand over her mouth and laughed, she looked like a child in a grown woman's body, even when she was old. What a beautiful visual there too. And it just talking more about the moment, it's talking about the woman. And I'm also taken to, my grandmother. She did the same thing. She put her hand over her mouth, and I don't know if it was because she was shy or she wanted to kind of like hide her teeth or something like that. But she did the same thing. And I'm thinking about my own grandmother who did that. And then, she looked like a child in a grown woman's body, even when she was old. So that young spirit comes through. And again, that life force is coming through in this. So many great descriptive words. As you can see, she really is, I believe, choosing her words carefully, and yet like it's probably coming natural to her because the author Crystal has this type of writing practice. And I'm certain this is the kind of thing when you're writing a personal memoir and thinking about these ancestors and the people who raised you, these stories have been in her mind for a while. She's made these observations. As writers, we become really great observers of life, and she brings that to this writing too. It's so good. What makes it good? Again, you can find this excerpt on Oxford American, and the excerpt's called Tasting Indian Creek, from Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghost by Crystal Wilkinson. And I'll just end with this photo here too. It says Granny Christine in her kitchen drinking coffee. Photo by Crystal Wilkinson, courtesy of the author. And this is just such a great photo. Of course, the contrast of the black and white, which is a theme. It's another one of the themes of this book. And most people would say, like, this isn't a super flattering photo in a way. Her little belly showing here, and the light is on it, and that too. But it is a beautiful photo because the the character, I think, of the grandmother comes through in this profile photo. You can even see in her eyes, it's like she's thinking about something, those eyes and that mind, and that that person has seen some things, thought some things, and here is enjoying her coffee with one of those hands that can gently hold yellow squash, and then also heft a ham during hog killing time. What makes it good? So good. My name's Donna Kozik. I'm the creator and leader of the original Write a Book in a Weekend program and our sister program, Done For You Publishing. You can pick up your own publishing checklist at doneforyoupublishing.com. For those who are here in my Zoom room, we're going to come in and discuss tasting Indian Creek a little bit more. For everybody else, thank you for listening to What Makes It Good, my Every Once in a While series. And you go out there, you keep on writing, and then we'll see you online. We'll see you on Amazon, and we will see you in the bookstore.